A struggling single dad, a flat tire, and a woman in a wedding dress standing barefoot on the side of a dusty road. When Jack pulls over to help her, he has no idea she's a billionaire bride who just walked out of her own wedding. No explanations, no last name, just a silent plea for a second chance at life. What begins as a roadside favor becomes a collision of worlds, secrets, and a love neither of them saw coming. This isn't just a story about helping a stranger, it's about breaking free, risking everything, and choosing love when everything says not to. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The alarm buzzed at 5:17 a.m., but Jack was already awake. He hadn't really slept, just dozed in and out, listening to the old wall heater wheeze and sputter like it might give up for good. A cold draft snuck in through the cracked window pane, brushing across his face like a reminder. Winter was coming, and he couldn't afford to fix it. He sat up slowly, careful not to wake Emily, who had curled up beside him at some point during the night. Her small hand rested on his arm, fingers still sticky with dried apple juice from last night's rushed dinner. He looked at her for a long second. 8 years old, and already learning to go without asking for more. It broke him in ways he didn't talk about. Jack eased off the mattress, just a twin on the floor, and stepped over the scattered laundry to the kitchen. The fridge rattled when he opened it. A half carton of milk, 2 eggs, and a slice of bologna he'd been saving. He poured the milk into Emily's school thermos. She wouldn't complain. She never did. The overdue bills were still stacked by the sink, unopened envelopes spotted with oil smudges. Rent was due in 4 days. His boss, Rick, had already warned him that hours were being cut again. "Things are slow, Jack," he'd said last Friday. "You know how it is." Jack knew. He also knew the rent wasn't going to pay itself with part-time shifts and the occasional break job from neighbors who offered him more apologies than cash. He stepped outside into the chill, a wrench still in his back pocket from yesterday, and lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. Across the street, a dog barked at nothing. The silence between the stars felt heavier than usual. He thought about the muffler job he had lined up today, $60, maybe 80 if the guy was feeling generous. Then he thought about Emily's shoes, the soles wearing thin, and the hole in her backpack where the zipper had come undone again. Jack took a long drag, blew out the smoke, and whispered to no one, "Just one good break. That's all I need." The sun hadn't risen yet, but his day had already begun. The old pickup rattled down Route 6, heater barely working, windshield smeared with yesterday's rain and this morning's frost. Jack gripped the steering wheel with one hand, the other cradling a coffee in a paper cup gone soft from reused mornings. Emily was already at school. He'd scraped together just enough gas to get there and back before the shop opened. Now he had 2 hours to kill before the muffler job, and nothing but the quiet stretch of road and static from the radio to keep him company. Then he saw her. It was just a flicker at first, a figure ahead, stumbling along the shoulder, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold in whatever pieces were left. Jack squinted, slowed down. As he got closer, the image sharpened, and he blinked twice to make sure he wasn't imagining it. A woman, in a wedding dress, barefoot. She was limping slightly, the hem of her gown torn and darkened with dirt. Her veil hung crooked over one shoulder, tangled in her hair, and her makeup, what was left of it, looked smudged, like maybe it had melted off in tears or rain or both. But it was her face that stopped him cold. Not the kind of beauty you'd see on a magazine cover, not polished or perfect, just raw, haunted, like she'd just come back from a place most people never talk about. Jack pulled over without thinking. His instincts always kicked in before his brain did. Fix first, ask later. He rolled down the window. "Hey," he said, "you all right?" She turned slowly, eyes wide and glassy, as if she hadn't heard a voice in hours, maybe days. She didn't answer, just stood there on the gravel, arms tightening around herself like the wind had claws. Jack got out, holding his hands up like he was approaching a frightened animal. "I'm not going to hurt you. Just, do you need help?" A ride somewhere?" She looked at him like she couldn't decide if he was real. Then her lips parted, but the only thing she said was, "Please don't ask questions." Jack hesitated, then he nodded once. "All right, get in." The truck's tires crunched over loose gravel as Jack turned around and came back to where she stood. She hadn't moved much, just shifted her weight from one foot to the other, arms hugging herself tighter. Her wedding dress was soaked from the morning dew, clinging to her legs like it was trying to pull her down. The car sat lopsided beside her, sleek and expensive-looking, one rear tire flattened into the dirt. Jack stepped out slowly, the door creaking behind him. "Looks like you've got a flat." She didn't answer right away. Her eyes flicked from the tire to him, then back again. Mistrust lingered in her expression, like she was weighing whether to run or stand her ground. "I've got a jack in the truck," Jack said, nodding toward his pickup. "Shouldn't take more than 10 minutes. "I can do it," she said quickly, too quickly. Her voice was hoarse, like she hadn't spoken in hours. She turned toward the car, like she might try to fix it herself, but she didn't move. Just stood there, hands balled into fists, shoulders shaking slightly. Jack didn't press. He walked over to her car and crouched next to the tire, checking it with practiced hands. "Big nail," he muttered. "Punctured clean through." She finally spoke again, softer this time. "You really don't have to." He looked up at her, saw the fight in her eyes, and also the exhaustion. "I know, but I'm here, and I don't mind." Still guarded, she glanced down the road like maybe someone might be chasing her, or maybe she was hoping someone would. Jack stood, brushing dirt from his knees. "Look," he said, "you don't got to talk. You don't got to explain. Just let me change the tire, and you can be on your way. That sound fair?" Her jaw clenched. Then, finally, she gave the smallest nod. Jack popped the trunk, grabbed the spare, and got to work. He didn't look at her again, just focused on the job, fast and silent, like he'd done 1,000 times before. But he felt her eyes on him the whole time, watching, waiting, like she didn't know what came next. By the time Jack finished tightening the last lug nut, the morning fog had started to lift, revealing the dull, gray stretch of highway ahead. The kind of road that didn't ask questions and didn't answer any either. He stood, wiping his hands on a rag pulled from his back pocket, then tossed it into the truck bed. "She's good to go," he said, nodding toward the car. The woman didn't move. She stood there like her legs were glued to the earth, arms wrapped tighter than before. He noticed then, really noticed, her feet. Bare, red and scraped, toes curled slightly against the gravel like she was trying not to wince with every shift of weight. Jack's brow creased. "You don't have any shoes?" he asked. She glanced down, as if only just realizing it herself. I left in a hurry." Jack said nothing, just looked at her for a long beat, then nodded once like that somehow made sense. It didn't, but he didn't push. "You want me to drive behind you?" he offered. "Just until you get somewhere more familiar?" "I'm not going home," she said, voice clipped. "All right. I'm not going back anywhere." He nodded again, hands in his jacket pockets now. "You got a name?" She hesitated, eyes narrowing like the question stung more than it should have. "It doesn't matter." "Fair enough," Jack said. He didn't ask again. The way she stood, the way she flinched at every distant sound, it told him more than a name ever could. She was running, not just from somewhere, from someone. The silence stretched between them like wire, tense, fragile. Finally, she stepped toward the driver's door, opened it, and paused. "Thank you," she said without looking at him. Jack watched her hands tremble as she gripped the steering wheel. He didn't say "you're welcome," didn't say anything, just gave her a soft nod and turned back to his truck, but he didn't drive off right away. He watched her in the rearview mirror for a moment longer than he meant to, watched her sit there, unmoving, like she didn't know how to shift from escape to survival. He figured he wouldn't see her again. He figured wrong. She never started the car. Jack sat in his truck, engine humming low, watching her in the mirror. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Still no movement. Her head rested against the steering wheel like the weight of the world had finally come crashing down, and she just didn't have the strength to pretend anymore. He exhaled sharply, rubbed a hand across his jaw, and killed the ignition. When he stepped out and walked back to her, she didn't lift her head. Just sat there, in that once white dress, stained and wrinkled, shoulders hunched like a crumpled note no one wanted to read. "You don't have anywhere to go, do you?" he asked gently. A pause, then a barely there shake of her head. He looked around. Miles of cracked asphalt and cornfields. The nearest town was 20 minutes up the road, if you could call it a town. Gas station, diner, and a half-dozen motels that hadn't seen new sheets in years. But they had locks and warmth. And right now, that was something. "There's a place off Route 3, Jack said. Small motel. It's not much, but it's something. I can drive you." She hesitated, then turned her face slightly toward him. Eyes swollen from crying, lips pale, she looked at him like she was waiting for a catch. "No strings," he said. "You don't even have to tell me your name." She nodded slowly. The drive was quiet. She didn't speak, didn't move. Jack kept glancing at her bare feet tucked up beneath her like she was trying to disappear into herself. The radio stayed off. The silence felt safer. They pulled into the lot of the Oak View Motel. Neon sign flickering, a busted vending machine by the office door. Jack walked in ahead of her, spoke to the tired-looking woman behind the counter, and slid 2 20s across the chipped laminate. It was most of what he had in his wallet. "One night," he said. He turned back to the woman, handed her the key without making her ask. As she reached for it, their hands brushed. Hers were cold. "Thank you," she whispered. Jack nodded and walked away without looking back, the weight of his empty wallet nothing compared to the heaviness in his chest. The shop was quiet for a Monday. Jack leaned under the hood of an old Civic, hands deep in grease. But his mind wasn't on the engine. It kept drifting back to the woman in the wedding dress, sitting in that car like she'd been dropped out of a storm and hadn't quite landed yet. He'd seen a lot in his time, drunks, runaways, people with broken hearts, but there was something different about her. The silence she carried wasn't just fear. It was something deeper, like she'd been silenced for too long and didn't know how to make a sound anymore. He'd told himself he wouldn't get involved, not beyond the tire, not beyond the motel. But here he was, turning a socket wrench like it might twist the questions out of his head. Why no shoes? Why no name? Why did her eyes look like she'd lost everything and still had something left to run from? The bell over the shop door jingled, snapping him back. Emily stood in the doorway, backpack sliding off one shoulder, hair slightly crooked under her knit hat. She always came here after school, always carrying something she'd drawn, or a new story she'd made up. "Hey, sweetheart," Jack said, wiping his hands on a rag. "How was class?" She ran up and wrapped her arms around his waist. "We learned about frogs," she said, "and I didn't forget my lunch today." "That's a win," Jack smiled, ruffling her hair. She pulled a crumpled drawing from her pocket, holding it up proudly. "This is you, and me, and the lady." Jack blinked. On the paper she'd drawn him in his work clothes, Emily holding his hand, and the woman, big dress, long hair, bare feet. Emily tilted her head. "Is she a fairy?" Jack blinked again. "What?" "The lady you helped, the one in the white dress." "Is she a fairy?" 'Cause she looked sad, but also kind of magic. He knelt beside her, brushing hair from her face. "I don't know what she is, Em." Emily smiled like she already knew. "Fairies don't need names. They just show up when you need 'em." Jack looked at the drawing again, then out the garage window toward the direction of the motel, and for the first time since he dropped her off, he felt something strange pulling at him. Maybe she wasn't a fairy, but maybe he still needed to see her again. Jack told himself it was just to check in, just to see if she was okay. He didn't owe her anything, and she certainly hadn't asked for anything. But still, After dropping Emily off at school and letting the shop sit quiet for an hour longer than it should, he found himself turning back onto Route 3 toward the Oakview Motel. The neon sign still flickered the same way it had the night before. The parking lot was nearly empty, the early morning sun doing little to warm the cracked pavement. He pulled in slowly, trying to tell himself this wasn't strange, that he wasn't crossing any line. Room 6. He remembered it clearly. He got out and walked up, each step heavier than the last. He hesitated before knocking. Maybe she'd be gone, maybe that was better, but something told him she wouldn't be. Something about the way she looked when she took that key, like she hadn't figured out what came after surviving. He raised his hand and knocked once. Light. Then again. The door opened halfway, chain still latched. She peeked through the gap, eyes wary and tired. Her hair was messier now, falling in loose waves over her shoulders. The wedding dress was gone, replaced by an oversized T-shirt, probably from the motel's emergency stash. She looked smaller somehow, like without the weight of the dress, she didn't know who she was. "You came back," she said quietly. "Just wanted to make sure you were still in one piece." She opened the door, just enough to unhook the chain, then pulled it wider. Jack stepped inside and was hit with the sterile scent of cheap cleaner and something heavier. Loneliness, maybe. She hadn't turned on the TV. No music, just silence. "I didn't know where else to go," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "And I don't have my phone or money." "You got a plan?" Jack asked, leaning against the dresser. She shook her head. "Not yet." Jack studied her, the way her hands gripped the hem of the T-shirt, like it was the last thread holding her together. "Well," he said after a long putteritos, "then I guess you start by not figuring it all out today." She looked up at him, eyes glassy. "And after that?" she asked. He shrugged. "We'll see." The diner down the road was open, but Jack passed it without a glance. He wasn't sure why he said it, only that the words came out before he had time to weigh them. "You eaten?" he asked her, standing in the middle of that dim motel room with the curtains drawn and the silence too thick. She shook her head, brushing hair out of her eyes. "Not since—" She didn't finish. Jack didn't ask. "Come on," he said, jerking his thumb toward the door. "I make a mean scrambled egg, and Emily's probably already making a mess in the kitchen." She hesitated. Not out of fear this time, but something else, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to accept kindness without giving something in return. She nodded, quiet. Jack's house wasn't much. A small rental with peeling paint, a crooked front porch, and a swing that creaked in the wind. But it was clean, lived in, warm. Emily was already sitting at the kitchen table, legs swinging under the chair, a marker-streaked worksheet in front of her. When Jack walked in with the woman behind him, Emily's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "You came back," she said, hopping down and running over, not even hesitating as she grabbed the woman's hand. "I drew more pictures. Want to see?" The woman blinked, startled by the burst of energy, but smiled for the first time in what felt like forever. "Sure," she said softly. Her voice cracked a little, like it hadn't been used for anything happy in a long time. Jack busied himself at the stove, cracking eggs into a bowl, listening to Emily chatter and the woman's low replies. She didn't talk much, but when she did, it was gentle, careful. Like she was relearning how to be around people. Emily brought over a drawing of a castle in the clouds. "That's your house," she said proudly, "because you look like a cloud princess." The woman laughed then, really laughed, and Jack had to stop whisking for a moment. He watched them from the stove, something tightening in his chest. He didn't know her story, didn't know what she'd lost or what she'd run from, but watching her lean over the table, smiling as Emily explained her crayon masterpiece, he knew one thing for sure: she belonged here more than she knew. The house had gone quiet. Emily was asleep, tucked under her unicorn blanket, one hand clutching the drawing of the Cloud Princess like it was a treasure. Jack stood in the kitchen, rinsing the last of the dishes, the sound of water soft and steady. It had been a strange day, normal in all the ways it shouldn't have been. A stranger in his home. Laughter over eggs, smiles that came from places still bleeding. He didn't expect to see her again tonight. Figured she'd already turned in, or maybe slipped back to the motel. He wouldn't have blamed her either way. But when he stepped outside to take the trash out, he saw her. She was sitting on the porch steps, arms wrapped around her knees, face tilted just enough for the moonlight to catch the shine in her eyes. Not from the stars, from tears. Jack paused, quiet. The kind of stillness where you know the wrong word could break something delicate. He set the trash bag down and moved slowly, sitting a few feet away, not too close, just close enough to say he saw her. She didn't speak at first, just stared out at the dark yard, eyes glistening, cheeks damp. He didn't ask if she was okay. She wasn't. Finally, her voice came, hoarse and barely above a whisper. "I couldn't do it." Jack looked at her, not pushing, just waiting. "I stood there," she continued, words trembling, "in front of hundreds of people, music playing, cameras flashing, everyone smiling like it was a fairy tale. And I looked at him, standing at the end of that aisle, and I realized I didn't even know who I was anymore." She rubbed her sleeve across her face, as if trying to erase the moment. "I couldn't go through with it. Not because he was cruel, he wasn't, but because I didn't want that life. The money, the expectations, the quiet deals behind closed doors. I couldn't breathe in that world." Jack nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch again, because sometimes silence was the only thing that didn't lie. "Running was the first real decision I've made in years," she whispered. And though her face was streaked with tears, there was something in her voice that sounded like freedom, or at least the start of it. The coffee was old, burnt, but Jack poured 2 mugs anyway. She sat at the kitchen table, legs curled under her in the oversized flannel shirt he'd loaned her, sleeves pushed past her wrists like a kid playing dress-up. The early morning light filtered through the blinds in thin golden stripes, cutting across the faded table and her tired face. Jack set a mug in front of her. She wrapped her fingers around it like she needed the heat more than the caffeine. He took the chair across from her, but didn't speak. He figured if she was going to talk, it had to come from her, not from him nudging and asking. He watched as she stared into the dark swirl of coffee, the steam catching the morning sun, like ghosts rising from something unfinished. Finally, her voice broke through. It was supposed to be perfect. Jack didn't say anything. She looked up at him, eyes red but clear now. No tears, just raw honesty. The dress, the flowers, the venue. It was all planned to the second. People flew in from 4 different countries. The press was outside. My mother kept adjusting my veil like it would fix the panic in my chest. She paused, took a breath that sounded like it hurt to hold. And I stood there behind those doors listening to the music start. And I realized I didn't want to be the person I was about to become. Not for him, not for them. Not for a legacy built on money and nameplates and magazine covers. Jack leaned back slightly, watching her. She was unraveling carefully, like someone who'd rehearsed how to fall apart without making a sound. I didn't even take my phone or shoes, just ran until I saw a road with no cameras, no drivers, no one calling my name like it belonged to someone I didn't recognize. Jack cleared his throat. And what name would they have called? She looked at him, expression tightening for just a second. Then she shook her head. "I'm not ready to give you that," she said quietly. "Not yet." Jack nodded slowly. "You don't have to," he said. And he meant it. The garage smelled like burnt oil and old rubber, familiar, grounding, even when the world outside kept shifting without warning. Jack wiped his hands on a rag that had long since stopped being useful and watched as Rick scribbled numbers onto a clipboard, face pinched the way it always was when bad news needed delivering. "Look, Jack," Rick said, not meeting his eyes, "you're one of the best I've got, but things are tight, real tight. Corporate's slashing labor hours across the board, and they want younger guys who can be cross-trained on sales. You know how it is." Jack swallowed. "So what's that mean for me?" Rick finally looked up, his voice lowering like sympathy made it sting less. "I'm cutting you back to 3 days a week, maybe 4, if something opens up. 3 days. That was barely rent, let alone food, gas, and the surprise trip to the doctor when Emily caught that cold last month." Jack stared at the concrete floor for a long moment, jaw clenched. He wanted to argue, to fight it, but he knew Rick didn't have anything more to give. "All right," Jack muttered. "Thanks for letting me know." Rick gave a quick nod, already turning back to the clipboard, like if he didn't linger, the guilt wouldn't stick. Jack changed out of his coveralls in silence, folding them with care even though they were streaked with grease. He drove home slowly, one hand on the wheel, the other tightening into a fist on his knee. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the road, and for the first time in months, he didn't know how he was going to hold it all together. When he walked through the front door, Emily came bounding down the hall, her hair still damp from a bath, and her pajamas twisted from getting dressed in a hurry. "Did you fix anything cool today?" she asked, eyes bright. Jack forced a smile, setting down his keys. "Oh yeah, real piece of work came in, needed a full engine rebuild." He ruffled her hair and tried not to show the crack behind his voice. Emily didn't notice. She wrapped her arms around his waist and said, "You're the best fixer ever, Daddy." And that, more than anything, was the reason he didn't fall apart. Not yet. The smell hit Jack the second he stepped through the door, garlic, something sweet like honey or cinnamon, and the unmistakable sizzle of something cooking in a pan that hadn't seen much love since Emily's last birthday. He paused in the doorway, confused for a second. He hadn't left anything on the stove. Then he heard laughter. Not Emily's, though hers followed a moment later, but hers. The woman. The runaway in the wedding dress who now wore one of Jack's old sweatshirts and looked more like she belonged here with every passing hour, despite everything about her that didn't. He walked into the kitchen to find Emily standing on a step stool, stirring something in a pot with exaggerated focus, while the woman moved around behind her, barefoot on the tile, flipping something golden in a skillet. Her hair was tied up in a messy bun, and flour dusted the edge of her cheek. Emily turned, beaming. "Daddy, we're making breakfast for dinner. She says it's a comfort thing." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" The woman glanced over her shoulder, smiling in a way that almost seemed shy. "I figured it was the least I could do after hijacking your kitchen and your flannel. Hope that's okay." He tried not to let it show, but the sight of them like that, his daughter grinning, this stranger at the stove like she'd always been part of the routine, hit him in a place he didn't realize had been empty for a long time. "It's more than okay," he said, voice quiet. Emily handed him a spoon, already sticky. "Taste the syrup. She made it herself. From scratch." Jack took the spoon, tasted, nodded. "That's dangerously good." "She's magic," Emily whispered, loud enough for both of them to hear. "I think she's really a princess." The woman froze for half a beat, spatula hovering mid-air. Then she laughed, soft and breathless. "Well," she said, placing the finished pancakes on a plate, "if I am, I'm a terrible one. I've never made syrup before in my life." Emily tilted her head, considering. "That's okay. Princesses can learn stuff." Jack watched as the woman set the plate down with care, her hands only trembling a little. Maybe princesses could learn, or maybe, like the rest of them, they were just trying to start over in a place that finally felt real. The bell above the gas station door gave its usual tired jingle as Jack stepped inside. The place smelled like burnt coffee and motor oil, same as always. He came here most mornings for fuel and a cheap cup of caffeine before work. But today he needed bread, eggs, and maybe a pack of gum, anything to make the trip seem normal. Anything to keep his mind from drifting back to the woman in his kitchen who'd somehow made pancakes taste like memories he didn't know he missed. He was waiting at the counter while the clerk punched in prices when the voice came from behind him. "Hey, you see this?" Jack turned slightly. Two guys stood near the rotating magazine rack, one of them holding up a folded tabloid with a glossy cover. The other leaned in. "Thought she looked familiar," the first one said, pointing at the page. "That's her, right? The Vale girl. Ran off before the wedding. $1 billion scandal or something." Jack's stomach sank. The second man squinted. "You sure?" "Yeah, look. Same eyes. Same face. Just messier in person. She's been all over the news. Fiancé's some European royal type. The article says she disappeared just hours before the ceremony. Half the world's looking for her." Jack didn't move, didn't speak. He stared at the photo the man held, the glossy, perfected version of the woman who'd stood barefoot on a roadside and cried on his porch just days ago. Same face, different world. "You think she's still around here?" the second guy asked. The first one shrugged. "If she's smart, she's already long gone." Jack paid in cash, said nothing, and walked out with the bag of groceries clutched too tightly in his hand. The truck door shut harder than it needed to. He gripped the steering wheel and sat there for a full minute before starting the engine. The hum of the motor was the only sound in the cab, but his thoughts were louder than ever. So it was true. She wasn't just running from a wedding, she was running from an empire. And now the world was starting to catch up. The sky outside had gone a deep kind of blue, the kind that signaled that the day was folding in on itself. Jack stood by the sink, rinsing dishes from dinner, the smell of garlic and butter still lingering in the air. Emily had already fallen asleep on the couch, one hand tangled in the hem of her dad's old hoodie that now belonged more to the woman than to him. She stood by the window, arms crossed, staring at the quiet street like it might suddenly come alive and drag her back to where she came from. Jack didn't say much. He hadn't since the gas station, since the tabloid, since the name Vale stuck to his brain like a warning label. Finally, she turned to face him. "There's something I need to tell you." Jack dried his hands, gave a quiet nod. "I figured." She walked slowly to the kitchen table, sat down, eyes darting once to make sure Emily was still asleep. Her fingers picked at a thread on her sleeve, like unraveling the truth had to start somewhere small. "My name isn't Ella. That's what I told the motel clerk and you, because I didn't know what else to say." Jack leaned against the counter, arms folded, waiting. "I'm Harper Vale," she said, "as in that Vale, the daughter of Richard Vale, founder of Vale Holdings, billion-dollar real estate, private islands, politicians at every holiday dinner." Her voice didn't rise. If anything, it got quieter, like speaking the name out loud was something dangerous or shameful. "I was supposed to marry Julian Croswell," she continued. "He's exactly who you'd expect, polished, powerful, and completely hollow. The wedding wasn't about love. It was a business merger dressed up in roses and ivory lace." Jack didn't move. He just stared, his face unreadable. She swallowed hard, eyes shining. "I didn't know what freedom felt like until I was running barefoot down the highway. I didn't know who I was until I didn't have anyone telling me who to be." Jack exhaled slowly. "So why tell me now?" She looked at him, her voice barely a breath. "Because I don't want to lie to you anymore." And for the first time he saw the weight of a last name, not worn like a crown, but carried like a chain. The air inside the kitchen shifted, like all the warmth from dinner had been drained through the cracks in the floorboards. Jack stood still, back straight, arms folded across his chest, but his jaw clenched just enough to give him away. Harper waited. She'd said the words, her real name, the life she'd walked away from, but now there was only silence, heavy and sharp. "You lied to me," Jack finally said, his voice low but edged like a blade dulled from use, not loud, not angry, but something colder, quieter, more dangerous. "I didn't lie," she replied, standing slowly. "I just didn't tell you everything." "That's the same damn thing." Harper winced but didn't look away. "I didn't know if I could trust you. I didn't even know if I could trust myself." Jack stepped away from the counter, shaking his head. "Do you have any idea what it felt like? Watching you in my home with my daughter, letting me believe you were just someone trying to figure life out?" "I was," she said, her voice cracking. "I am." "No, Jack snapped, louder now. "You're Harper Vale, heiress to an empire, tabloid royalty. You've got people combing the country looking for you while I've been feeding you pancakes like you're some stray cat that wandered in from the cold. That's not fair, isn't it?" Jack's laugh was short and humorless. "I'm breaking my back to keep my daughter warm and the lights on. And you, what? You get to drop into my life like some fairy tale and pretend none of that matters?" "I never meant to hurt you," Harper whispered. Jack turned, running a hand over his face. "But you did." He looked over at the couch where Emily slept peacefully, blissfully unaware. "You should go," he said, not looking at her, "back to the motel, or wherever else people like you disappear to." Harper blinked like she hadn't expected it, even though she probably should have. She didn't cry, not this time. She just grabbed her coat, her shoes still by the door untouched, and then, without another word, she stepped outside and closed the door behind her. The quiet that followed felt colder than anything winter could bring. The morning came gray and muted, a thin layer of frost lining the window panes. Jack sat at the kitchen table, staring into his coffee like it held answers he couldn't name. The silence in the house was different now. It wasn't the usual stillness before the day began. It was hollow, as if someone had taken a piece of the place with them when they left. Emily padded into the kitchen in her socks, rubbing sleep from her eyes, hair sticking out in every direction like a dandelion gone wild. She didn't say anything at first, just climbed into the chair across from him and looked at the empty spot at the table. "Where's Miss Princess?" she asked, swinging her legs under the chair. Jack hesitated, his hand tightening around the mug. He didn't want to lie, but he didn't have the words for the truth either, not the kind a kid should have to hear. "She left," he said softly. "Had some things she needed to figure out?" Emily was quiet for a moment, chewing on her bottom lip. Then she frowned. "She looked sad when she left, like inside sad, not like when I scraped my knee." Jack swallowed hard. "Yeah, I think she was." Emily tilted her head, her eyes full of questions too big for someone her age. "Did she break her heart?" He looked at her, surprised by the simplicity of it. Not did she have her heart broken, not did someone else hurt her. Just, did she do it to herself? "I don't know," he said, his voice rougher than he meant it to be. "Maybe." Emily picked up a crayon from the table and started drawing on the back of an old envelope, her brow furrowed in quiet concentration. After a while, she slid the picture across to him. It was a heart, cracked in the middle, but stitched back together with stars. "I think hearts can be fixed," she said, not looking up, "even if they break a little." Jack stared at the drawing for a long time, and for the first time that morning, he wondered if maybe his daughter understood more than he did. It was just past noon when Jack heard the knock. He froze mid-step in the hallway, still holding the laundry basket he'd meant to drop in the bedroom. It had been a quiet morning, too quiet, the kind of quiet that made a man think too long about what he said and what he didn't, about all the things he wished he'd done differently. Another knock, softer this time, like maybe whoever stood on the other side wasn't sure they were welcome. He opened the door slowly. There she was, Harper, same woman, different presence, no longer hiding behind borrowed clothes and silence. She wore jeans and a dark sweater now, hair pulled back, eyes wide but steady. She didn't look like an heiress or a headline. She looked like someone who hadn't slept, someone who'd thought too hard for too long, and still wasn't sure if she'd made the right call. Jack didn't say anything, just leaned against the door frame, jaw tight. Harper took a breath. "I went back," she said, "to the city, to my apartment. I thought maybe I could undo what I did." He didn't respond. She kept going. But it was like walking into someone else's life. "I stood in the foyer for 10 minutes and couldn't breathe. Everything was perfect, untouched. My phone had 37 voicemails. My mother sent a driver. My father sent a lawyer. And Julian, he sent flowers." Her laugh was bitter, short. "White roses. He never once asked if I was okay." Jack folded his arms, but his silence was softer now, waiting. I stood in front of that mirror in my old room and tried to see her again, the woman I was supposed to be. But she was gone. Harper's voice broke just slightly. And the only thing I wanted, the only thing I missed, was here. He looked at her then, eyes narrowing, cautious. I don't want the mansion, she said, stepping closer. I don't want the money or the headlines or a name that gets me into rooms filled with strangers. She placed her hand lightly on the doorframe. I want this. Pancakes, crayons on the kitchen table, cold coffee and second chances. Jack searched her face, every part of him screaming not to trust too easy, but there was something in her eyes, something real. And that was enough to make him step back and let her in. Jack closed the door behind her slowly, the soft thud echoing through the house like something final, something fragile finally clicking back into place. Harper stood in the middle of the living room, looking around like it had changed in the 24 hours she'd been gone. It hadn't. Same cracked tile by the kitchen, same couch with the spring that squeaked when you sat too fast. But something was different. The weight between them had shifted. Emily peeked out from the hallway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. When she saw Harper, her face lit up like morning sun. She didn't ask questions, just ran to her and wrapped her arms around her waist. You came back, she said. I knew you would. Harper bent down and hugged her tightly, her voice caught in her throat. I missed you. Jack stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching them. He let the moment stretch a little longer than maybe he should have, let the warmth creep back in before he finally spoke. You can stay, he said, his voice firm, but not unkind. Harper looked up, eyes searching his. But there's one condition, he added. She straightened slowly, brushing hair out of her face. Anything. No more lies, he said. Not about your name, not about where you've been. If you stay here, you're part of this, not hiding, not running, just here with us. All in. Harper nodded, her throat tightening. I swear. Jack held her gaze for a beat longer, then finally stepped forward and reached for the grocery bag she'd brought with her. She smiled, tentative. I brought real syrup this time. Jack gave a small, almost reluctant laugh. We'll see if it's better than yours. Harper glanced around the room again, letting herself breathe. There were no chandeliers, no marble floors, no staff waiting in the wings, just worn furniture, a buzzing fridge, and a girl who believed in princesses and pancakes. But for the first time in her life, it felt like enough. More than enough. It felt like home. The days blurred, each one folding into the next like pages in a book neither of them dared finish too soon. Harper settled into the rhythms of the house as if she'd always known them. Coffee in the mornings, stories with Emily at night, flour on her hands from learning Jack's biscuit recipe that wasn't really a recipe at all. She laughed more now, softer, fuller, but only when she thought no one was watching. Jack was always watching, not in the way that made her feel scrutinized, but like he was trying to memorize the shape of something he didn't believe would stay. They moved around each other carefully, like two people standing on thin ice, afraid that if they got too close, it would crack beneath them. One night, after Emily had fallen asleep in the armchair with a book open on her chest, Jack brought out an old blanket and laid it over her. Harper stood in the doorway, arms folded, her eyes resting gently on the little girl. Her voice came low. She dreams with her whole heart. Jack looked at her. She gets that from her mom. It was the first time he'd mentioned Emily's mother out loud. Harper turned to him, something shifting in her eyes. Do you miss her? Jack took a breath, long and slow. I miss what I thought we had. I miss the idea of it. But that version of love, it left a long time ago. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. I never even had that. They stood there in the soft hush of the house, nothing but the hum of the fridge and the tick of the clock filling the space between them. Harper stepped closer, not bold, just enough. Her hand brushed against his as they both reached to straighten the blanket. Jack didn't move. She looked up at him, her eyes asking questions she wasn't ready to say out loud. Their faces were close, closer than before. Her breath caught, lips parting just slightly. Jack leaned in, drawn by something unspoken, something real. And then he stopped, pulled back, not abruptly, just enough. Harper blinked, her expression unreadable. Jack's voice was low. Not like this. Not until I know it's not just because I'm the only one who stayed. She looked down, nodded once. Neither of them said anything else. But everything had changed. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and heavy in Harper's hands. It looked out of place on Jack's worn kitchen table, like someone had dropped a silk curtain over a rusted fence, and hoped no one would notice the difference. She set it down in front of him gently, like it might break if she wasn't careful. "What's this?" Jack asked, glancing at it with suspicion, more than curiosity. "A gala," Harper said. "My family's foundation. It's next weekend. Formal, but not over the top." She hesitated, already sensing the answer. "I'd like you to come, you and Emily, as my guests." Jack stared at the envelope without touching it. The silence between them stretched longer than it should have. She tried to smile. "You wouldn't have to wear a tux, just maybe not the grease-stained flannel." His jaw flexed, slow and tight. "Why?" "Because I want you there," Harper said, voice soft. "I want them to see the people who matter to me, not just the names and the deals and the artificial smiles. You and Emily, you're real." Jack finally picked up the envelope, opened it, and scanned the invitation. Gold lettering, embossed logo, a list of honorees that sounded more like a stock portfolio than a guest list. He set it down again. "That's not my world," he said. Harper blinked. "Jack, I'm not asking you to become someone you're not. I'm asking you to stand beside me." He shook his head. "You don't need me there. You've survived that world longer than I ever could. I change brake pads. I patch tires. I don't sip champagne with people who think grit is a marketing gimmick." "You think I want that world?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I walked away from all of it for a reason." "Then why are you walking back in?" Jack shot back, not harsh but tired. "Because if you go, they'll expect the old Harper, the one you ran from. And if I'm standing next to you, I'll just be another reminder that you don't belong with them anymore." Harper swallowed hard. "I thought maybe I could bridge the gap." Jack looked away. "Some gaps aren't meant to be bridged," he said quietly. And with that, the envelope stayed unopened on the table, untouched, unclaimed. The knock came just after sunset, sharp and deliberate. Jack was in the garage, elbows deep in an old carburetor, when Harper appeared in the doorway. Her face was pale, eyes wide in a way he hadn't seen since the first night they met. "There's someone here," she said, barely above a whisper. Jack wiped his hands on a rag, already moving. When he stepped onto the porch, the man was waiting at the edge of the walkway, tailored coat, leather shoes too clean for this town. His stance was casual, but there was something in the way he held his chin, like he expected the world to bow to him. "Julian," Harper said behind Jack, her voice tight. Julian Croswell turned. He smiled, the kind of smile you see in boardrooms right before someone signs their life away. "Darling," he said, as if they were standing at a cocktail party, "you've been difficult to find." Jack stepped forward, instinct tightening his shoulders. "She's not going anywhere with you." Julian didn't even glance at him. "And you must be the mechanic." Jack didn't flinch. "That's right." Julian turned back to Harper, voice smooth. "Your father is furious. Your mother's embarrassed. You humiliated your entire family. And for what? This?" He gestured around, eyes grazing over the porch, the flaking paint, the yard Emily had half decorated with sidewalk chalk. "I'm not going back," Harper said firmly. "You can tell them that." Julian's smile didn't fade. "I could, but I don't think they'll take it well." He stepped closer now, just a fraction. "You've had your little rebellion, Harper, your escape. It ends now. Come home, quietly. We'll tell the press you were sick, overwhelmed. We'll spin it." "And if I don't?" she asked, voice trembling. Julian's gaze slid to Jack, then back to her. "Then your friend here, he becomes a problem. We both know what happens to problems." Jack took a step forward, fists clenched. Julian smirked. "Careful, Jack. You're already a footnote. Don't make yourself a cautionary tale." Harper's hand found Jack's. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," she said. Julian tilted his head. "Then you're more naive than I thought." He turned and walked back to his car, his footsteps too calm for the storm he'd just left behind. Jack didn't speak. Neither did Harper. But they both knew this wasn't over, not even close. Jack didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table long after the lights were out, after Emily was tucked in and Harper had stopped pacing in the hallway. His knuckles were still tight from how hard he'd clenched his fists earlier, the memory of Julian's voice playing in a loop that made his skin crawl. Jack knew men like him, men who used threats like currency, who didn't yell because they didn't have to. They had people for that. Lawyers, enforcers, contracts dressed as ultimatums. Men like Julian didn't raise their hands. They pulled strings and let the world bend for them. And Harper had run from all that straight into his life, into Emily's. Now, danger had caught up. By morning, Jack was already outside, checking the locks on the doors, reinforcing the shed, going over everything twice. Harper came out wrapped in one of Emily's blankets, hair tangled from sleep she hadn't really gotten. Her eyes were rimmed red. "You think he meant it?" she asked. Jack looked at her for a long moment. "I know he did." "I should go," she whispered. "If I leave, he'll stop." "He won't hurt you or Emily if I'm gone." Jack shook his head. "You leave. You give him what he wants. And next time, it won't just be a visit. It'll be worse." Her lip trembled. "But I can't let you take the fall for me." "You're not a burden," he said. "You didn't ask for this. But you came here, and that means something. Emily loves you. He paused, the words almost there, then locked them away. "You're part of this now. I won't let him scare you out of it." She stepped forward, voice low. "What do we do?" Jack reached into the drawer by the sink and pulled out the only thing he trusted more than words, an old flip phone, prepaid. "You take Emily. Go to my sister's place in Ridgeview. She'll know what to do." Harper's eyes widened. "What about you?" "I'll handle Julian. You can't go up against him alone." Jack looked her straight in the eyes. "I don't need to beat him. I just need to show him I'm not afraid to stand." And for the first time in a long time, Harper didn't argue. She just nodded and started packing. The house felt colder without her. It wasn't the weather. Spring had finally started to push winter out the door. The windows were cracked open, letting in fresh air and the smell of damp soil. But the warmth was gone. The hum beneath their little routines, the quiet laughter in the morning, the extra plate at dinner. Harper had taken all of that with her when she left. Again. Jack moved through the house like a man underwater. He fixed what needed fixing, took Emily to school, made coffee he barely drank. And at night, when the silence settled, he sat by the door longer than he should have, hoping for a knock that never came. Emily noticed. Of course she did. She was small, not blind. One afternoon she came into the garage while he was working under the hood of an old Chevy. She climbed onto the step stool she used to help and just watched him for a while, not saying a word. Then softly, "Is she gone again?" Jack didn't look up. He tightened a bolt that didn't need tightening. "Yeah, baby, she is." Emily was quiet for a long beat. Did she stop loving us? The wrench slipped from Jack's hand, clattering to the ground. He closed his eyes, throat tightening. "No," he said. "No, Em, she didn't." "Then why'd she leave?" He knelt in front of her, wiping his hands on a rag before gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Because some people run when they're scared," he said, "even when they care, especially then." Emily's lip trembled. "But I'm not scary." Jack pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "No, sweetheart, you're not. You're the bravest person I know." She buried her face in his shoulder, her small hands clutching the back of his shirt. Jack stared at the doorway behind her, where Harper once stood barefoot and uncertain, and wondered if she was looking for another road to disappear down, or if she was fighting her way back. He didn't know, but he held onto his daughter tighter that night and promised himself one thing: they would be okay, even if Harper never came back. Harper stood in front of the Vale building, the name etched in cold stone across the arch above the doors. It loomed like a monument to everything she had once been expected to become: daughter, wife, partner in power. She hadn't stepped foot inside since the morning of the wedding, since she'd ripped off her shoes, taken the side exit, and disappeared. Now she was back, but not for them. She walked through the lobby, shoulders squared, ignoring the sharp glances from security and the receptionist's startled gasp. Word had gotten around. Her photo had been circulated, speculated on, picked apart like some kind of myth. But she wasn't here to be a mystery anymore. The elevator ride felt too slow. Her reflection in the polished metal walls didn't look like Harper Vale. She looked human, real. And she liked that. When the doors opened to the executive floor, her father's assistant stood up so quickly she nearly knocked over her chair. "Miss Vale, you, tell him I'm here," Harper said. The door to Richard Vale's office opened before the assistant could react. Her father stepped out, phone in one hand, disbelief in his eyes. "Harper, I'm not staying," she said, before he could speak again. "I'm here to end this." He blinked. "End what? This life, this name, the trust fund, the board seat? I want it all transferred out. I'm done." "You don't just walk away from this family." "I already did." He tried to step closer, but she didn't move. "This isn't about pride," she said. "It's about freedom." Richard's jaw tightened. "And you think freedom lives in some mechanic's garage?" "No," she said. "I think freedom starts with walking away from what never made me feel like myself." He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded, but it wasn't approval. It was resignation. "I'll have the papers drawn up," he said. "I already did," Harper replied, reaching into her bag and sliding the documents across the table. When she walked out of that building, the wind felt different, lighter, sharper, like it was welcoming someone who finally chose her own name, her own path, on her own terms. The gates groaned as they opened, slow and reluctant, like even the iron didn't want to let go of her. Harper stepped out of the black town car, one of the few pieces of her former life she'd allowed around for this final trip. The gravel crunched beneath her heels as she walked up the long drive, past manicured hedges and fountains, sculpted to impress no one in particular. The mansion stood exactly as she remembered it, flawless, sterile, hollow. It had never felt like home. Inside, the staff greeted her with stiff nods, their eyes a mixture of confusion and sympathy. They'd seen her as a ghost for years. Now she was flesh and bone and decision. Her mother was waiting in the drawing room, fingers wrapped around a teacup that hadn't moved since Harper last walked out. She didn't stand, didn't ask how Harper had been. "I heard you filed the paperwork," she said, voice clipped. "I did." "You're giving up everything." "I'm letting it go," Harper replied. "There's a difference." Her mother looked out the window, lips pressed into a tight line. "You were supposed to carry the name forward, build on what we started." "I never asked to be part of it," Harper said, "and I'm done pretending I believe in any of it." Upstairs, the walls of her old room still carried the faint scent of perfume and disuse. She opened the closet, staring at the designer dresses lined up like museum exhibits. At the vanity, a silver-framed photo of her engagement day still sat, untouched. She turned it face down. A few hours later, the attorneys arrived. Signatures were exchanged, shares transferred, trusts dissolved. Harper Vale, the heiress, the symbol, the future of the Vale legacy, was legally and entirely severed from the empire. The mansion was no longer hers. But then again, it never really had been. She left the estate with nothing but a small duffel and the weight of finality pressing against her ribs. The car pulled away from the gates, and she didn't look back. She didn't need to. Because what waited for her down that long stretch of highway wasn't an empire. It was something real, something chosen, something she'd earned without permission. Home. Jack was sitting on the porch, a beer in his hand, trying to ignore the mess of his thoughts. The wind had picked up, making the trees rustle, and the distant sounds of the town feel like a distant memory. The house was quiet, too quiet, and it didn't sit right with him. He hadn't heard from Harper since the night she left, since everything had spiraled out of control. He'd told himself he wasn't going to wait, told himself he wouldn't be one of those guys who held on to something that wasn't his to keep. And yet, every time he walked through the house, the silence hit him like a weight. The tires on the gravel crunched before the car even came into view. At first, Jack thought it was someone else, another neighbor maybe, or a delivery truck. But as the sleek black car turned into the driveway, he saw her, Harper. She was standing outside the car before it even stopped, her hand on the door like she was about to step out, but unsure if she should. Her hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands falling over her face in the way he remembered. She looked different. Harder, maybe. But still, it was her. Jack stood up, his heart thumping in his chest. But he didn't move toward her. He couldn't. Not yet. She took a step forward, and then another. "Jack," she said, her voice low and uncertain. He didn't say anything, just stared at her, waiting for an explanation he wasn't sure he'd get. Harper stopped a few feet from him, the weight of everything between them hanging heavy in the air. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wasn't asking for anything. She was just here. "If you'll have me," she said, her eyes meeting his, "I want to stay." The words hit him harder than he expected. He had wanted her back in ways he hadn't let himself admit. But this was something else. She wasn't the same woman who'd left. She wasn't the woman who had walked out of the life that made her someone else. She was here now. Jack swallowed hard, taking a long breath, trying to piece together the mess of emotions that surged inside him. He didn't answer at first. He couldn't. There was too much at stake. Finally, he took a step toward her, closing the space between them. His hand reached out, brushing against her arm, lightly at first, like he was testing the waters. "You don't have to ask," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. Her eyes softened, but there was no more uncertainty, no more second-guessing. "I'm home," she whispered. And for the first time in too long, Jack believed it. The air was still, too still for a late summer evening. The porch light flickered, casting faint shadows that stretched across the worn steps, the same ones Jack had sat on 100 times before. But tonight, everything felt different. The house was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the trees, the low hum of the town far in the distance. Harper stood beside him, just a few inches away, but it felt like a chasm between them. She hadn't said much since she'd come back, not in words anyway. There was something else in the way she moved, the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention. "I never thought I'd be here again," she said, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft, almost as if she was speaking to herself. She glanced down at the ground, avoiding his gaze. "I thought I had it all figured out, thought I could outrun it." Jack didn't answer at first. He just stared at her, watched the way the light caught her hair, how it seemed to pull her back into the girl he'd once known, the one who hadn't worn a mask. "You were running from something real," he said quietly, his voice rougher than he'd meant it to be. "But you can't outrun yourself." Harper looked up at him then, her eyes wide, searching. There was something raw in the way she looked at him, something vulnerable that she never used to show. "I'm not running anymore," she whispered. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure if she was talking about him or the life she'd left behind, but he didn't care. The words hung in the air like a promise neither of them had been brave enough to make before. He reached out, his hand brushing against her arm, just the lightest touch. She didn't pull away. In fact, she leaned into it just slightly, as if she needed him to hold her there. Her breath caught, and Jack didn't know who moved first, but suddenly they were closer, too close to pretend any more, and he couldn't breathe without her scent filling his lungs. Her eyes fluttered closed, and that was all it took. He kissed her. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was soft, a gentle meeting of lips that spoke everything neither of them had said before. It was 1,000 things, years of questions, months of hurt, and all the quiet moments in between. When they finally pulled away, neither of them said a word. They didn't need to. The kiss had said it all, and as they stood there side by side, the silence felt right again. This was the beginning of something neither of them could outrun. The shop wasn't much, just a small, run-down building tucked between a couple of other businesses on the edge of town. But to Jack, it was everything. He'd spent years working on other people's cars, fixing engines that weren't his, putting in hours for a paycheck that barely covered the bills. But now it was his turn. His hands were the ones that would turn the wrench, his eyes the ones that would see the rusted pieces come back to life. He didn't need a grand opening or a shiny sign to know that this was the place he'd been working toward for years. All he needed was the space, the time. And Harper? She was there every morning, right beside him, rolling up her sleeves in that way she always did when she wanted to prove something, except now it was for him, for them. She didn't talk much about what had happened to her, about the life she'd walked away from, but that didn't matter anymore. The house was a different place now, the air lighter with her there, like it had finally settled into something real. Emily, who had become the heartbeat of the shop, walked in one morning holding a large piece of chalk. She stopped at the front door, squatted down, and began drawing in big, messy letters across the concrete, the Ferry Garage. Jack stood there, frozen for a second, then chuckled softly. He had no idea where she'd come up with the name, but it felt right. It felt like something both magical and grounded at the same time. Like all the things that had been broken in their lives had come together in a way that made them whole. "Is that okay?" Emily asked, looking up at him, her eyes wide with hope. Jack looked at the chalked letters, the way they stood out against the dull gray floor, and then over at Harper, who was watching from the counter, a quiet smile on her face. "It's perfect," he said. "It's more than okay." They worked side by side for weeks, Harper answering phones, taking care of the business side of things, and Jack getting his hands dirty in ways he never had before. But it wasn't just the work. It was the feeling of having something to build together, something that had been theirs from the start. It was Emily's giggles, echoing in the back of the shop, her stories about fairies and princesses as she picked up tools and handed them to Jack like she was already part of the team. In the quiet moments, when the noise of the world outside faded, Jack realized something he hadn't even known he was missing. It wasn't just the work he had wanted. It was this life, with them, with Harper beside him, the two of them finding their way one wrench at a time. And as the sun set over the shop, Jack finally allowed